move on with item 8. We're back live streaming. So if we have item 8, I believe that's Chris and Beth are just going to talk to us about the funding formula, the weighted pupil numbers and the pupil growth fund. And we do have some votes in this.
That's right. Thank you. I'm going to start for Chris, and then Chris will take over after the first couple of slides. So just minimise all your faces. So we've got within the DSG funding allocation for the schools block, we have an allocation for growth. In the 2021 budget, that's 4 million, and we don't yet have that figure for the 2021-22 budget. We'll get that in December for the 2 unitaries, and we've previously talked about how that's calculated. That approach ensures that new schools have sufficient funding when they're either a new school opening in the September, or if there are new classes being put on within the year. So those pupils aren't within the census the previous October, so they aren't pulled through in the funding formula. So we apply that growth funding that's within the DSG in 2 ways. We add in weighted numbers into the funding formula, so that's 7/12 of the year if they're a September class, and we also have a growth fund. Both methods are applied to maintained and academy primary, secondary and all through schools in the same way. The 21-22 schools funding operational guidance states that LAs are not expected to request government approval to increase pupil numbers within the schools funding formula. It's just considered to be a normal part of the process. So that's where there's a new school or pupil taking an increase in children. We would have to go to them if we were going to request a decrease, but that would be a very strange circumstance. LAs do require schools forum to agree the increases that Chris will take you through in a moment. And the Northamptonshire has quite a strict policy on how it applies these additional weighted numbers that we add into the schools funding formula. We only apply it where the schools are within a category called new and growing. So they have to have been opened within the last 7 years and have to be year groups which had absolutely no pupils in the census. So that's to add them into the funding formula, the APT tools that we receive from the government to calculate the funding formula budgets. Outside of that method is the growth fund. So we're proposing that we would continue this policy of adding in the weighted pupil numbers for additional classes where there's a class with no pupils in the census date into both the unitary funding formulas. So I'll pass over to Chris. Chris, if you'd like to tell me when you want me to move the slides.
Thanks very much, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. So in terms of those pupil number adjustments that Beth has just been talking about, the first one we will be looking to vote on is a new school that NCC will be delivering on the Towcester South housing development, obviously in Towcester. It is anticipated that this school will open in September 21, and although it will be a 2-form of entry primary school, eventually it's only intended that we open the school with 30 pupils in its reception cohort to avoid any detrimental impact that might have on existing schools in the area. That's the only new school that will open in the forthcoming academic year. Obviously that's in the West Unitary Authority, and there'll be none in the North. If you can move down for us, Beth. These are the new year groups that we will be adding, that obviously had none in his census day, as Beth has just touched on. We're looking at adding a number of new year groups, all of whom are in the West. Those are at new schools at Radston Fields in Brackley, Monksmoor in Daventry, Pine and Barnes, Wootton Hall and Northampton International Academy, all of whom are in Northampton. Right, sorry, next slide please, Beth. Obviously outside of the new schools and the new year groups that Northamptonshire County Council has brought forward previously, there's also the traditional free school programme that is conducted and schools delivered by the Department for Education. At the current time, you can obviously see a list of the new free schools that are coming forward in the county in forthcoming academic years. We have two that are intended to open in September 2021. And the best information we have at the current time from colleagues at the DFE is that both the Buckton Fields Primary School, which is just on the outskirts of Kingsthorpe in Northampton, will open in September, as will a new secondary SEN school that will open in Risdon. The new SEN school for Risdon will have a capacity of 145 by the time it's full, and will be offering 27 places to students with SEN in its first year of operation. And you can see we've got a number coming in forthcoming academic years, two of which I'd like to draw your attention to because they're particularly pertinent in terms of NTC and its successor unitary authorities meeting its statutory obligation to providing a sufficiency of school places, and those are the secondary schools that are due to open. The Moulton area, which will serve basic need demand in Northampton Town, and the Corbury secondary one there. Obviously, these schools are being delivered by the DFE. NTC are effectively a third party to those proceedings. So any date given in terms of their opening is subject to change. Thanks, Beth. Sorry, can you move on to the next slide for us?
Okay.
Right. For any new members to forum and the shadow forums, NTC operates what's called its Pupil Growth Fund. Basically, it's a fund that allows NTC or its successor unitary authorities to forward fund growth. Obviously, it provides revenue funding schools require to meet the increased staff costs they will incur as a result of extending at the request of the local authority. If this fund wasn't in place, schools would be put at quite a severe financial detriment when they did expand, and it's absolutely key to us meeting our statutory obligation to provide a sufficiency of school places. Obviously, sorry, Beth, if you just slide back for us. It's just important to note at this point that the guidance that governs pupil growth funds across the country prohibits it being used to help schools in financial difficulty, and it is not there to fund just general growth at any given existing school that's occurred through the popularity of the school in question. Thanks, Beth. So we're proposing to continue the current policy and criteria for application of the Growth Fund for both the North and the West unitary authorities. The current policy dictates that schools will receive a set amount of funding on whether they take 15, 30 or possibly even 60 or 90 increase in their pupil numbers in any given year. The funding rates were last updated in 2017-2018 academic year, and we're also proposing to increase these in line with the two significant increases in teachers' pay that's occurred since that point. And Appendix A, which we'll come on to later, gives specific details of that. If you could flick onto the next one for us, Beth. So at the moment, the figures I provided Beth with are current agreed expenditure within the 21-22 pupil growth fund budget. They will be slightly higher in this in reality because we're just going through the process of ensuring we've got enough school places in both unitary authorities for September 21. There is a particular pressure on secondary places in Northampton Town itself, and as a result, figures will be slightly higher than what is shown here. The total budget, current budget for the Pupil Growth Fund is £1.687 million. As Beth has touched on earlier, we recoup some of that funding that goes to academies for the first part of each financial year, which means in effect that the actual budget is more like £2.4 million. Moving forward, you'll be looking at a 60% split in favour of the West Unitary Authority to ensure there's sufficient budget to cover growth in that area. And obviously a 40% split for the North, given the growth we're anticipating in each unitary authority area. So I saw a question from Vanessa flick up there, but I've lost it again. But I'll cover that at the end if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, cool. Next slide, please, Beth.
Sorry, it's just taking a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, so today we are asking Forum to vote on the agreed weighted numbers that have been presented, the new year groups and the new school that we covered earlier in the presentation. We are also asking Forum to vote and agree the current growth policy for both the North and the West unitary areas, and to vote and agree to increase the rates currently provided by the Pupil Growth Fund for teachers to accommodate that the salary increases that have occurred since those figures were last voted upon.
Okay, so before we go to that vote, Chris, can we just then answer Vanessa's question? It was about whether growth funding would be provided year on year, i.e. as pupils move through the school years.
Yeah, absolutely. So it works slightly differently depending on what sort of expansion a school has had. If a primary school permanently increases its PAN from 30 to 60 pupils, that primary school will receive pupil growth funding for the 7 years that it obviously takes from that initial bulge in reception to move through at the end of year 6. If I'll come knocking at, say, a secondary school's door to take a bulge class, say in Northampton, as I may well be doing to some Forum members, and it's just a bulge class, it's not a permanent increase in PAN, you will only get that growth funding to account for to cover that lagging funding. So if you take a 1 year bulge, you will get that funding for 1 year, because the next year that bulge in pupils will be accounted in your budget proper, and you'll receive your funding that way.
Is that not also true, therefore, of a primary school that increases its PAN? Because you're saying if it increase, because if you increase your children in reception, you'll get the money the year after. Why would you get growth fund money as well?
If you permanently increase your plan, you're taking on a new year group year on year. So obviously the first year that class is in reception. Yeah. You will get the money for that class in your following year budget, but that class is in year 1 and you've taken on another reception class. So technically you've got 2 classes the year after. So any permanent increase in PAN follows the year group through. Any temporary follows it for the length of time that bulge is in place, as it were.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't thinking straight then. Thank you. Vanessa, is that okay? That make sense? Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we will move to, if there are no other comments or questions, then we will move to a vote. As we discussed earlier, only members of the current Schools Forum may vote. So that is all the current members, not the shadow members. Okay, so this is a vote for current members. Yes, Secretary?
Yes, that's correct. And Beth, if you could stop the screen share, and then if members could turn their cameras on so we can see them, that will aid us in carrying out the vote.
Okay, so our first vote is for a vote to agree the weighted numbers presented for the West. So that is all of the current Forum members can vote on the vote to agree the weighted numbers presented for the West. So all those in favour of that, please indicate.
Got 15 for, Chair.
Okay. All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to the next vote, which we have to have 2 different votes. It is again all current members. So it is a vote to agree to continue the current growth policy. So the policy that we have in existence already, but we are continuing that for the north. And then we will vote on the west. So all those in favour of continuing that growth policy for the north, please indicate.
Got 16 for there, Chair.
Okay, all those against, sorry, I lost my plot a little bit there. All those against, anybody, and any abstentions? No, okay, thank you. Now we need to do the same vote again now for the west. So all those in favour of agreeing to continue the current growth policy for the west of the county, please indicate your agreement.
$16 for again, Chair.
Okay, and all those against? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you. So now our vote, again 2 votes, north and west, is to vote to agree to increase the rates to cover the current salaries. We all know that the rate was set a couple of years ago. There have been considerable increases. We might not notice it, but there have been increases since that time. So all those in favour of agreeing to increase the rates to cover current salaries for the Northamptonshire, please indicate.
Got 16 for there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And all those against and all those abstaining. Thank you. So now the same vote for the west of the county, well, West Northamptonshire. It's not the west of the county anymore. For West Northamptonshire, it is its own authority. So all those in favour for the west.
Got 17, Chair.
I
think Ron had dropped out momentarily in previous vote.
I think you might have lost my first vote, Sandra Appleby.
Was your first vote in favour, Sandra?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I just let Ron Whittaker in from the waiting room, so I think he may have been absent for the first couple of votes there as well.
Okay. Do we need to go back and do that again, or do we have
I think the voting's clear, Chair, so I think we're fine.
Okay, so I'm up to the west, aren't I?
Yep.
I'm up to the west and the increase in salaries. All those in favour of an increase in salaries for the west?
Yeah, 17, Chair.
Thank you very much. And all those against and any abstentions? No, thank you. Okay, so the next vote is to do with to agree the growth fund budgets. And so the growth fund budgets, the agreement is for the north, it's 0.8 million.
Sorry, Joe, just to jump in, because we're increasing the rates and because there's additional growth, we're going to take the actual budget pots to the December meeting. So we've removed that part of the voting.
We'll do that one then. I wondered why it had disappeared off the slide. Sorry, it's still on my notes.
So we need to build these changes in. Sorry, we hadn't.
Okay. All right. So we will defer that then to and vote on that at the December meeting. Thanks, Beth. Okay. Thank you very much. Is that the end of that item, Secretary?
Yes, believe so, Chair. We're on to the early years update next.
Thank you. So, Jess, would you like to speak to us, please, about an early years update?
Yes, of course. Beth, would you mind putting this? Thank you. If you can go to the first. That's it. Thank you. I thought, since some of you are new, I thought I'd introduce myself first. My name is Jess Milne, and I'm the Strategic Manager for Early Education and Childcare. And I, on the agenda, I was going to go through the proposed early year single funding formula for 21-22, but I thought it might be pertinent for you all to have a short update about the government temporary change for autumn 2020 funding, due to the COVID-19 and what the current position for this autumn block may be. So, and then I'll go on to the proposed early year single formula, if that's okay. Yeah. So, yeah. So Beth, next one. So, as some of you may know, there was an announcement by the DfE about making changes to the autumn funding. And just to give you a bit of a background, and I know that Beth, you've already mentioned some of this before, but what they are proposing is that our autumn funding 2020 is based on, it should be based on the autumn 19, using the census for January 20 rather than the January 21 census. And what we've decided to do is to start paying all our, we're paying all our providers with an actual head count, because we thought it was quite important. You can skip to the next one, sorry, Beth. What we wanted to do is, because what we don't want to do is get an overspend, because the DfE is expecting the autumn 20 to be lower than January census, and therefore we should be getting exactly the right amount of funding. However, rather than making that decision and being at risk of overspend, we have decided as a local authority, in collaboration with the DfE, is to go through each month in a very, very detailed manner, and then in December take a decision on where we are with the autumn funding. And Beth and I and some of our colleagues, you can change to the next, this is just for information. There. Sorry, back again. Thank you. So what we're doing is that we don't want to change our funding for any of our funding at the moment, because work is underway to financially model that current levels of hours being claimed for September and October. And we're also going to include November to calculate the estimates to make sure that we don't reach an overspend. Because as we all know, COVID is continuing. So should January census be as low as August, we may get into a little bit of difficulty. But our aim is to avoid any significant overspend, but we are going to make sure that we are passporting every single piece of money that we have to the sector, because it's incredibly important that we support the sector in this way. And I just wanted to inform you about what these changes may or may not, what the impact will be for the sector, because obviously a lot of the sectors are struggling in terms of sustainability, and we are doing our utmost with our detailed work to make sure that doesn't happen. And we will come out, we will bring that to the December forum as well. So I hope that makes sense. But we really need to make sure that we support the sector as much as we can. And in order for what that detailed work is undertaken, part of what we're doing is that we're going through setting to setting, each borough and each district and by provider, to see what the negative impact is. And as we have already committed, we are already, the funding follows the child. And what we what we're looking at in terms of sufficiency, if there should be any differences in between the boroughs, and if any of them need some extra support.
Okay. Thank you.
So in terms of the September figures, we are like I said, we are doing the very, very detailed work, and September and October at the moment actually shows a decrease of hours of approximately 9.5%. However, we're still undertaking that work, and we will inform everybody as soon as we know.
Okay, thank you, Jess.
Okay, so next one, Beth. Thank you. So in terms of the funding formula for 2020 to 2021, we have no plans to change. And what's important to know that there's no plans at the moment unless we receive an announcement in October of any increases. And we will, of course, where we can and at all possible, we will pass over any increase to the base rate to the sector as originally planned last January, because we think it's really important that we passport as much as we can. At the moment, we are topslicing 3.7% instead of what we are allowed to do 5%, because we feel that we need to pay the sector. And we have, as you all know, we've had a significant reduction in our service to accommodate that. So next slide. Thank you. This is just for your information only, specifically for you guys that are new, and it just shows you the funding which is current, and should we not get an increase for next announcement expected at the end of October, then these we would hope that these will be the ones that we take forward to next one. So our next step, which we'll be bringing to the forum in December, is that we are currently working on the central budget and looking at the split between West and North, and that work is undertaken at the moment by lots of our colleagues, and we will be able to bring that to a vote and provide for information to the school forum and the shadow authority for a vote in December. And the work is continuing on the disaggregation, and that will continue, as Sharon already mentioned before in her information section.
Yes, can I just check, should that say 21, 22?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear that we were talking about next year, not this year.
Yeah, no.
Okay, no, that's
absolutely. Thank you, Jo.
Fine, okay. We've got a couple of comments, so I'll wait till you finish and then we will answer those, okay?
Yeah, no, that is the end of my presentation. Like I said, it was more for information only, and we will bring further and more detailed information in December, and also so we'll be able to be in a position to vote on.
Okay, thank you, Jess. So there's just there's a couple of comments here. So from Sandra, so really, does that mean settings will experience a delay in payments based on attendance because of the way that you're micro paying?
Okay, no, what we're doing at the moment, Sandra, what we're doing is we're paying on actual head count. So if you've got 10 children, we're paying 10 children. So that is important, and I thought that was we as a team thought that was really important, and that means everybody can know exactly what to expect. So I hope that answers your question. And can I just add, Sandra, as well, is that we are obviously paying for those who are self-isolating, shielding, or closing for COVID. There is no change to those payments whatsoever. Is that okay, Sandra?
It was just specifically the time frame. I didn't know if you were alluding to a delay potentially.
No.
Would there be a kind of greater depth of analysis going on?
Yeah, the detailed analysis that's going on at the moment is we thought was really important to get to the real numbers, because as you all know as well, when we start in September, the numbers in early years are fairly sort of on medium term, and then the increase in October, but the biggest increase is November. So although we've got the initial data for September, October, we thought it was very important to get the November data, and we will be doing some options about what to do. And like I said before, when we can, we will passport everything over. And as you know, we've made significant cuts to make that happen within our service. So I can assure you it is of utmost importance for us to be able to do that. Sometimes it's just, sometimes we need to wait to make sure we get the figures, because what we don't want to do is get to being overspent, where we then need to start changing the base rate. And as you can know, Sandra, that is not a place where we want to go.
So just to be clear though, all that extra work you're doing won't lead to the payments being late? No.
Payments are currently undertaken, and apart from a few late headcounts being submitted, they all should have had their
headcounts. Then that's a different thing. It's about
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So the question from Muriel from the SFA: what other proposals should the funding increase for EY? Will the increases be included in any consultation?
Yeah, it depends on where we get to, Muriel, with our final analysis, because if the numbers are continuing the way we are, then there might not need to be a consultation. However, should that analysis change, then yeah, we'll need to have further discussions with all of our partners.
Okay, and then from Angela, so has the work been completed to contact the ESFA about the maintained nursery schools funding formula?
Okay, hi Angela. Could I ask that I will forward that question to Sharon? Sorry, Sharon, there you are.
I was just trying to log on. We're still going through that work, Angela. So following our meeting, I think it's 2 weeks, it's Friday. We're moving that work through, and we will get back to you on that, but that's slightly separate from this agenda today.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you for the question, Angela. Yeah, go on, Joe.
And then I think we have a question from Rachel, which is about the Tier 2 inclusion fund. So
yes, hi Rachel. I know we're all very keen to get to the final part of the inclusion funding. Can I just ask you to have just a little bit more patience with us, because we're going through the descriptors and work at the moment, and it needs to also be unitary safe. So I'm sorry, Rachel, I haven't got an answer for you at the moment, but as soon as we know, we will let you know. Is that okay, Rachel?
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. Okay, so I think then if there are no more comments then about the early years update, thank you very much, Jess, and we will move on to the maintained schools dedelegation for, again, I think that should be 21-22. And Alison, I did see Alison arrive just a little while ago into the Zoom. Alison Golding from NCC is going to start us off with that. Hello, Alison.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, Paul, are you putting the presentation up, or? Great, thank you. You'll have to just wave if if you can't hear me, but hopefully the Wi-Fi is all right. Yep. So this is the review of de-delegated funding for trade union duties. So it requires a vote as per previous years. I'll present the first few slides and then hand over to the trade unions to see whether they've got anything else that they want to add. So essentially, it's currently operated within a per pupil rate of £2.10, as it says on that slide. There's no change to this proposed for this year. And just to remind you, the budget is used to reimburse employing schools for the salary costs of trade union representatives undertaking trade union duties across participating schools. If you just move on to the next slide. this is just a nod to the fact that, as with many things at the moment, it's slightly more complicated with the unitary picture, because obviously from April 21 there'll be 2 schools forums, but your vote now is for 21. At the current time, we need to accept really that the overall picture of trade union representative split across North and West is not quite clear yet. So we've got a few unknowns there, but as I said, this is the vote for 2021-22, when there'll be 2 new unitaries. The next slide just gives you current trade union facility time, as you can see there. And if we just move on to the next one, in September, the trade unions wrote to NCC in respect of seeking additional trade union facility time between now and April. So they wrote to NCC on the basis that there was additional work being created by the Unitary Council move, and also in response to COVID. NCC didn't view the request as unreasonable given the circumstances, and additional facility time was agreed for the trade unions across NCC. So there is a proposal as well for schools facility time to be increased for the period October to March. And in terms of how this can be funded, it can be funded from the carry forward that we've got at the moment, which is at the cost of around £8,000. If you move on to the next slide, I don't know if Beth wants to add anything here. This is just the current budget situation.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Alison. I've pulled these figures together to show you that we have an underspend that we've carried forward from 1920 into 2021. And at the current rate, we're expecting a 79,000 underspend on the budget to be carried forward to 21-22. And that sort of is maintained in our current predictions with the current level of facility time to continue and slightly increase towards the end of 21-22. There would be, I think, under normal circumstances, the option of reducing the rate to try and lower that overspend. But I think with the uncertainties of unitary and also wanting to have healthy budgets for the 2 new unitaries to work with, we're proposing to keep it steady and continue to take the same rate that we've been taking in 2021.
Okay, thank you. And the next, the next slide. I don't think
the next slide's another financial one, yeah. And this is because the budget is based on a per pupil amount from the delegated budgets for maintained schools, we can quite easily split it based on the current pupil funding formula. So this is how 2021 budget would have split into North and West if we were to do that exercise this year. So you can get an idea of how the budget will split in 21-22.
Okay.
Apologies, I've got a date incorrect on the middle column of that slide, so they should both be 21-22.
Okay, thank you, Beth. So moving on to the next slide. And as previously reiterated on behalf of NCC, we continue to support the delegation at NCC. It does ensure that schools and the council meet their legal obligations. In respect of that, it's a system that works for us. So as I said, we continue to support that. I think we've got Elaine on the call, and from NEU, and Daniel from NAHT. I don't know if Kev's here as well. So I'll just hand over to one of those to just pick up the final slide, which is around the trade union benefits. So sorry, move on to the next one.
Could I just say it's NASUWT?
Sorry, Dan.
That's all right, that's fine.
Okay, so moving on to into the next slide. Does one of the trade unions want to present that one?
Shall I start, and then you can obviously correct me if I've said anything, but obviously we both represent teachers, so that's why we're both here. But also we also represent some of the supply staff as well, who go into lots of the other schools, and the support staff. So we just wanted to show the benefits of what we do at the moment. We are both teachers currently, the caseworkers that Dan and I are here, and the other caseworkers that we have, that we've worked in Northamptonshire for quite a while. So we have a lot of those personal connections. Speaking for myself, I've got children within the system as well. So we're obviously passionate about making sure the best things happen within schools. We deal with the casework. Now, that obviously means that we represent our members in disciplinaries or in absence meetings and in grievances. But one of the things that we do as part of our role is, because we've got those local connections, we'll often get phoned by head teachers, for example, or other teachers who aren't even our members, in advance of them worrying about something that might get out of hand, and we're able to intervene at an early level, often preventing things becoming more formal or becoming more serious, which is where the second bullet point, that fast, efficient and informal resolution, we're able to contribute to that. In terms of addressing some of these issues, that obviously contributes to resolving issues at an earlier stage, but that could be with individuals, that could also be with a greater number of staff, that we can come in and help in a situation where there's a number of staff who've got a particular issue, or if the teachers, the head teachers, want to communicate something with the staff, that we can help that. And we use our local knowledge to do that, to support local members. And up until recently, we've been able to travel locally. That's obviously not happening quite so much at the moment, but we're able to be there in person or at the end of a Zoom call for those meetings, the way that we do it. Now, you can see that I'm calling in from school today. As a general rule, though, the way that we do this, school are able to manage my timetable. So they've given me time to do this, so that there aren't 25 of us asking for cover on different days. And so on, the school are able to dedicate one day of my week, 2 days at the moment of my week, where they've timetabled me. I still teach all of my classes, but that I can come out and represent members when I need to. Thank you. And I'll take any questions after Dan's spoken, obviously.
Thank you. I would like to thank Elaine and everyone here, and I'd especially like to thank all the heads and everyone involved over the past around about 8 months. It's been really trying for all of us, and I would like to say that I think with the time and the work that that's increased, without the facility time that we get, I don't think it would have been so smooth and helpful for all of us, because I think the communication was there between unions and NCC and as many schools as we can help about. It supported our members, and I think it also supported the schools really well in that aspect. I mean, a lot of the meetings that we had surrounding schools, a lot of that information that we needed to get through was passed on to NCC and then directly passed on to schools. I know you're getting daily updates, which is amazing, and I don't think the communication would have been as good if we didn't have this time. I would also like to say that, like Elaine, I'm a teacher, and I work in the proof sector, so I have I have an understanding right across the board, and most of our caseworkers do as well. They have very good training in different parts of the teaching practice. We also have within our union, we have heads who are also part of the members, and I'm sure Elaine has the same right across. So we're quite varied, and when it comes down to casework or any other work that we need to do, unfortunately, things like redundancy and so forth sometimes crops up. We are always there to willing to help, and the additional time helps extremely well to make sure these things are done smoothly and for the benefit of all. And again, like Elaine, if anybody's got any questions, please do ask. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so are there any questions from any of the forum members for any of us?
There's a question from Vanessa, which is about why there is, understand why there's such a large surplus.
Certainly within us, we haven't we do have the staff, but they're currently employed. If the schools don't pay in, obviously they can't access the facilities funding. So we have got teachers who are doing casework without facilities funding at the moment. We're hoping that they will be able to access that. So that's partly been the reason.
Yeah, that's correct. As Elaine said, we've had some unions who've got the award of time but haven't accessed the funding because they haven't had the time kind of made available to them, I suppose. So
right, okay.
that's part of the reason.
And I think you mentioned that there might be the option, I think it was Beth that said, as we move to the two unitary authorities, there may be the option to look at looking at how much is needed, but now is not the time to do that because we need to move forward with an appropriate amount of money to counter any circumstances which might arise. But actually, if we've got that much carry forward, we might need to look at whether we need to put that much money in and make it a bit more balanced.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a better question for the 22-23 budgets.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? So for the vote here, this is a vote for the maintained schools, and it's done by primary and secondary. So the first vote is for our 3 primary maintained representatives, Pat, Vanessa and John. And that is so the first vote is so just to be really clear with everybody else, nobody else gets a vote other than Pat, Vanessa and John. It's much easier to do this when we're all in the room, isn't it? But it's really clear now, it's just Pat Kelly, Vanessa Bradley and John Lake who are able to vote on continuing the de-delegation at the same rate of £2.10 per pupil for the North. Okay, so of the 3 of you, all those in favour of continuing that de-delegation, all those abstaining, and all those against. Vanessa, was that an abstain? An against?
A 4.
Oh, that was a 4. Sorry. Well, I had a bit of a.
I do apologise, Chair. You read them so quickly that my hand didn't go up in time. Sorry.
So I'll just go through that again. All those in favour. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. So that was for the North. I'm going to take it no abstentions and no against because there's just 3 of you. It's quite easy. So in terms of the West, I'll pose that question again. All those in favour of continuing the de-delegation at the same rate of £2.10 per pupil for the West. Thank you. So that's all 3 members there in favour. Paul. So the second vote is restricted to our secondary maintained representative. I'm just looking on my screen to see if I can find my secretary. There you are. Sorry, Siobhan. So that vote is restricted to the North. So all those in favour of continuing the de-delegation at the same rate of £2.10 per pupil for the trade union activities, all those in favour? Thank you very much. Against and not unnecessary, all members have voted. So those 2 de-delegations are passed. And then, Alison, you're not continuing with the SIG aspect, are you? No.
No.
Okay. So thank you very much to our trade union colleagues and to Alison for joining us for that portion of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to the next section of that piece, which is about the school improvement grant, and I think that's you, Sharon, isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks. If you can pop the slides on for me, Paul.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so just wait for the slides to come up. Okay, so for points, if we go on to slide 2, please, Paul. So obviously today, as per the other sections, to vote on the proposals, and just pulled together a series of slides just to give you an update of the work of the team. Whilst this is headed School Improvement Grant for schools, colleagues, it's the School Effectiveness team, if that makes sense, in terms of the people that you may know and may have contacted you and worked with you. So I'll just go through the slides because it gives you a bit of a background in relation to the team, what they've done, what they're doing. And also, Joe, if you remember when we chatted before, you talked to me about, well, what do they do for academies? And so I'll put that bit in there as well. So I did listen. Okay, so next slide, please, Paul. Okay, so this just shows the current amount that was approved and also total available resources. We did have a significant carry forward from last year. And the reason for that was that we had just one of those years where we had a lot of people leave for different sets of circumstances. And as colleagues know, sometimes it's not always easy to appoint the right person first time round. So that meant, because this team is predominantly a salary team, it meant that we had some underspends, which we agreed to carry forward and focus on some accelerated projects this year. Next slide, Paul. So obviously we have a new strategic manager who joined us this year, and her name is Carrie Trail, and I would like to get Carrie along to the next round of forums so that colleagues can begin to meet her, and then obviously we can share further work. So the school effectiveness team, which are funded by this grant, look really at focusing those schools that are either in requires improvement and have been for some time, or those where we've been identified with special measures. We don't just look at those schools though, we also look at the overall data set in Northamptonshire and identify any of the schools where the indicators are, notwithstanding this year, but where the indicators are in relation of a downward trend around performance and outcomes. So it's a holistic view of the school system with then some targeted support. Moving on to next slide, Paul. So in terms of what have we been doing, we've absolutely, even throughout COVID, but obviously in a different arrangement, and providing schools to school support for those schools that are requiring an intervention. And that can take various means. So we can have a partnership head teacher arrangement, which will support the head, whether that's a new head or a head that may need support and have some development areas, but also looking at individual partnership arrangements. So it will be school specific, and it will be dependent on the improvement plan and action plan of the school and where the resource is best needed to elevate the progress that we need to make within the school community for our children. So that's just give you a range of the kind of options and strategies we deploy. Moving on, Paul. So in terms of impact, which is always the key question, obviously we're looking to focus on the impact on the ground for our children in those settings and make sure that the changes that we make are sustained and embedded, and that we can move the setting on and that children can achieve standards that we would wish our children to achieve. And again, just pulled out some key stats in relation to what we have achieved, but obviously colleagues will appreciate this year is a little different in terms of current trend data. Moving on, Paul. So ongoing priorities, I thought it'd just be useful to share those with you. And obviously, as we move into the 2 new unitaries, we'll be looking at future strategies, etc. But currently, these are the priorities of the school effectiveness teams in terms of their work across the school estate. Moving on, Paul. Okay, and then again, just really down into the weeds now, really. So the work the school effectiveness team can do. What I would say around this particular area, Joe and colleagues, is obviously this team, so key officers who you may know, Katie Morledge and Joe Hutchinson, who head up the North and West, because these teams are already split in localities. They have also, with colleagues, been heavily supporting our response to the COVID issue in terms of supporting schools around risk assessments, health and safety assessments, and individual issues with head teachers and leadership teams. So as well as the business as usual work we would do with schools requiring support from the local authority, these colleagues have absolutely been supporting the wider school estate with regard to our COVID response activity. Okay, moving on, Paul. Okay, so I think, as I mentioned a couple of forum meetings ago, we took an accelerated approach when we knew that we were able to carry the funds over, to make sure that we picked up some of the downtime that we had last year because of our inability to recruit. So we absolutely did that. So our current outlays that we don't expect there to be a significant underspend, but I think, Beth, from completeness, you've just put that there in relation to should that happen. So I think we're at this point, Joe, where we need to vote. And what I would like to do, and I think again it moves when we move to the north and west, is perhaps provide more detailed landscape and action plans so you can see it the next level down, which I think is similar to other requests you've had before. But hopefully that set of slides show the breadth of the work, but also the work that we're doing with the Regional Schools Commissioner, and looking at performance as a whole rather than just for our maintained sector.
Pat has a question which sort of is the antithesis to my question from previously, which was, so the school effectiveness work is not just funded by the SIG grant, is that correct?
I think it has some base budget funding, Beth, is that correct?
Yeah. So I think my question last year was, if there's base budget funding, why does it appear as if all of the SIG work is aimed at maintained schools?
I think it's perhaps just the way it's presented, because I don't think it is, Joe, because I think it's in this, and this is why I'm saying perhaps we need to get to the next level down in terms of the work that we've been doing with the RSC and looking at academy profiles.
Because I think that's Pat's point, is why if non-maintained schools are benefiting, why are they not contributing? But I think my question last year was, I thought that non-maintained schools were contributing to the school effectiveness team through other funding. Beth? Oh, Beth, you're on mute.
I'm aware of the school effectiveness being a sort of applicable to all. That's not a de-delegated budget, but I'm afraid I'd have to take that away and look into sort of the details of who benefits from it in more detail for you.
I think it's the funding. So in terms of the school effectiveness team, is it purely funded through the SIG grant paid for by the maintained schools, or is it funded partly through that and partly through other budget?
I think it might be useful if I open up the Appendix A on the monitoring and share that for you. I think you can see them as separate lines, but I'm sorry, my memory is not brilliant, so I'll just put that on the screen for you. So you can see the School Improvement Group is on row 26, and that's the de-delegated part. And then you have the School Standards and Effectiveness as a separate budget, which is DSG and I think a combined service. So there's an NCC contribution as well. That's a separate budget.
Okay, Pat, does that answer your question as to why non-maintained schools appear to be benefiting? Yeah. And I think that was my question last year, which was why it all seemed to be directed towards maintained schools when that money was coming in from the DSG, which everybody is part of, and therefore where was the balance? So I think that comes up to that. Vanessa has a question about how many people are in the school effectiveness team.
I should know, shouldn't I? I will get that figure to you. I'm not going to guess a figure. I have it in my in my head, but it might be wrong. So I will get that to you. It's not a huge team. It's certainly nowhere near the size that they used to be in years gone by. We've just been looking at them for the future Northants work, but I can't pick the figure out, so I'll get that to Paul, and Paul will put it in the minutes.
Okay, it's not a large team though, is it? It is a small number. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks, Pat. So I think therefore we're at the point where we will vote on that. So that is to continue the primary maintained SIG-D delegation of £7.50 per pupil in 21-22, I believe that should say there, to create an estimated budget of North 78k and West 105k. And again, that vote is restricted to Pat, John and Vanessa. And so all those in favour of continuing the school improvement grant for the North, please indicate agreement. I have lost John. So, okay, that's 3. Thank you very much. So 3 in favour, and all of those in favour of continuing that for the West. And that is the same amount. Then thank you very much, Pat, Vanessa and John. Thank you. So Beth, you are now going to talk to us about the maintained schools redundancy costs.
Yeah, thank you. I'll share my screen again. I might have to get up and let my son in very briefly at 3:30. Right, so this is the third and final dedelegation for maintained schools budgets. This dedelegation enables maintained schools to collectively manage redundancy situations that are unaffordable for individual schools. Maintained primary schools can access the financial support when restructuring for the purpose of bringing their budget into balance. It gives some protection to schools that need to adjust their staffing structures in order to manage their financial circumstances, which prevents them from incurring deficits and compounding their financial difficulties. To access the fund, maintained schools currently submit a redundancy business case in an agreed format that is available on asking from either HR or finance. If specific conditions are met, then financial support is authorised by the Director of Children's and the Section 151 officer or their deputies, sorry, the Chief Finance Officer. The level of support provided has previously started at the lower of 25% of the annual saving of the restructure or the cost of redundancies once uncommitted reserves have been used. If the cost of redundancies has then caused a deficit budget, a negotiation has taken place and sometimes an increased percentage has been given. I've felt that hasn't been a written policy. That when I took over this role, it was quite difficult to find out what the policy we were implementing was, because we hadn't put that in front of Schools Forum and it wasn't written in anything that we publish. It's also, I think, quite difficult for schools to plan when they're beginning to look at the redundancies that they might need to put into place to balance, if they're not sure what level of support that they would receive from us through this dedelegation pot. So I'm proposing here that we change it to a simpler basis, that they receive 25% of the cost of redundancy or greater, unless the resulting cost leaves the school in a deficit budget within 1 year, in which case we would meet the full cost up to the point, that their reserves are met.
Okay.
These are the criteria for accessing the fund, which again we hadn't published. So hopefully this is by publishing this, it will make it simpler for schools to know in advance whether they can access the pot. So they must be a maintained primary school, because those are the ones paying into the dedelegation fund. A maintained mainstream primary school, I should say, because it's taken off the national funding formula for mainstream schools. Primaries and the restructure must have been needed to bring the school budget into balance within the next year, or across the 3-year business plan that they submit to us. There mustn't be reserves held that could cover the cost of the redundancies. The revised structure must balance the budget, and that's always been a rule that's in place. But there are some circumstances where where we would go outside of that, where work is already underway because of known unavoidable financial pressures. So, for example, where a school's about to amalgamate because of known financial issues, or there might be other known sort of issues, then that would mean we could go outside of that requirement. The 3-year business plan before and after restructure must be provided in a business case, setting out the reasons and who's at risk, and that goes through HR, either their own HR or if they pay to our NCC HR service through them. The estimate of the cost must be provided in the business case, including an estimate of the pension strain, which they usually get from their HR providers. And quite often I receive business cases without any kind of cost implication in it, in terms of what they're expecting to receive from the dedelegation funding. So in 2021, the dedelegation rate per pupil was £5. It was £1 in 1920 because there was a surplus at that point of setting the 1920 budget. So we came back up to the usual rates in 2021 of £5 per pupil. We've received 5 redundancy business cases so far in 2021. Some of those are still ongoing to be resolved, to be sorted out. And we currently predict that there'll be again a similar underspend at the end of 2021 to that there was at the end of 1920. And on a similar kind of basis, because we're going into 2 new unitary authorities, I'm not suggesting that we completely remove any underspend, but I'm suggesting that because it is so high, we could reduce the rate to £1.50 per pupil, and the estimate of how that would affect the budgets are shown in the table below. So we're still looking at, if we split based north and west based on the pupil census, we're still expecting significant underspend to be rolled forward. So in conclusion, the contributions can therefore be reduced during the year. Sorry, that's not in conclusion. Not quite got there yet. The contributions and the budgets can reduce during the year if maintained schools convert to academy, as there's then a portion of their contribution would reduce depending on when they convert. And then as this funding is dedelegated from individual maintained school budgets, any underspend at the end of 2021 would be carried forward, ring-fenced, as we've said previously. So there's the final slide for my presentation. We've got a vote required on whether you'd like to decrease the rate to £1.50 per pupil for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire.
It's always a positive thing when we're asking for less money, I do feel. So I'm going to put that to a vote again for our 3 primary maintained school representatives. If you wouldn't mind ending the presentation, Beth, so I can see if that would, thank you. So again, the vote is for Pat, Vanessa and John. So we have the redundancy dedelegation being continued, but at the decreased rate of £1.50. And so all those of Pat, Vanessa and John in favour of continuing at the reduced rate of £1.50 for the North. Thank you. That's all in favour. And for the West. Thank you very much. And both agreed there by full vote. I completely agree with you. Thank you very much, Beth, for that clarity around what the process is and that transparency. So it's really clear to schools what it is what they need, what position they need to be in, and what they can expect from the fund. So I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That ends the vote. I feel like I'm in Eurovision. So Gwyn, if we could move on just to high needs place numbers and financial pressure. I think we've already mentioned that earlier.
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, I won't bore you with the figures, you've already heard them. So I think we can say, I mean, I'm a very big agenda item next time because I've got to bring a load of information to you, but just as a very brief overview, the pressure continues on the high needs budget, and that's from every angle. It's both SEND and for alternative provision. And lots of different reasons for that. So we're continuing to look at that. There's Kevin, you mentioned a question earlier on about the Northwest and the movement between the two. Absolutely, that's something we're going to look at because it will be counted as a cross-border movement, as it is if young people move into Bedford or any of our other bordering counties. But I think obviously there's an opportunity, as it's one county splitting into two, that we come up with an agreement, certainly, you know, for a year or 2 years. And so that will be discussed with the shadow boards as they start taking on decisions for the future. So absolutely, Kevin, and thanks for highlighting for that. Rob, the local provision to reduce overspend, that would absolutely be my wish. I think at the moment, the increase in local provision at best is going to stop an increase in going out of county at this point in time, because it cannot reduce an overspend until we stop actually accelerating the number of young people that are moving out of mainstream schools. So that goes back to the need, which is why we have the project fund, which I'll touch on in a second, to try and actually look and really understand the drivers for young people being, escalated through the SEN process and actually out into a special school or specialist provision. So we can't actually reduce the spend until we fundamentally reduce the numbers. There is a finite limit, as our special school colleagues will tell us, that they cannot keep expanding buildings. They work very, very well with us, all of them, to actually take in as many children as they can. But actually they're now getting to really physical capacity. And there's very little room now in our estate to actually expand the special schools, though they have all taken on numbers, as you can see from the numbers. And also the units are working with us too. The existing units are working to increase numbers in the areas of ASD and SEMH specifically, where we have the most pressure points. And I'm very pleased that Chris and I are working with quite a number of mainstream schools now to look at different models of supporting young people with ASD and or an SEMH, that to maintain them in a mainstream school, because academically that is what they need. They need the mainstream curriculum, but they have barriers to actually accessing that. Some of it an SEN and some of it not. So it's looking at how we can manage and support those young people and support the schools to support them more effectively. So there is some quite exciting conversations going on, but I can't share details with you at this point, but I might have a few more in fruition from December. However, that is happening. So what is going on with the project? So the project will help to support some of these new provisions. And I've also got two projects on the go. The first one is the SEMH project, which was started pre-COVID. I don't know if all of you came to our think tanks on SEMH and also SEND. So the work started, but then of course COVID hit. So we haven't been able to get together to continue with that, though in the background where we are still moving that on. So I hope to reopen those conversations, and some of these provisions will be like mini pilots to help support to see what is the best way to meet the needs of these young people, but tying in with all the other things that are going on from health and public health around mental health and well-being. There's the Mental Health in Schools programme, which is happening in the East Northants and in Northampton. So, there's plenty of other things going in, but we need to make sure we tie in with all of those. And then Whole School Send, which is a national organisation funded by DFE. They have come and had a chat with me, and we've looked at a potential project to look at the use of units and how they can expand exclusion, absolute opposite, inclusion, in not only their own school, but also into their locality schools, and also looking at the governance of SEND within mainstream settings. And so that Whole School SEND as an organisation is going to DFE to get the project signed off, and I'm hoping to hear in November that that can go ahead, and then I will be writing out to all of you to ask who would like to be involved in that initiative as well, to actually start helping to promote inclusion. And part of that is that we do need at some point, given our circumstances with the organisational changes, etc., to look at high needs funding, how it's distributed and whether it's actually having the greatest impact that it could have. So there's never a dull moment as ever. So, you know, there's lots to think about in SEND. What is coming up that we do need to do the consultations. There's 2 consultations from high needs funding that need to go out as business as usual, and the vote on those will be in December. We'll bring back the results of the consultation. And the first one is on the movement between the schools block and the high needs funding block. Last year you voted and approved a move over of the 0.25%, which is half of the maximum. I am going to be asking for 0.5% this year. So we will be sending those questions out and a paper about that, hopefully this week, isn't it, Beth? That we'll
be aiming for that, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other consultation that needs to go out, so there is a vote in December, is about moving from the schools block to the early years block, and the proposal that amount is exactly the same as last year, which, correct me, was it 857?
805,000.
Sorry, 805. Cheap.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. 805,000 from the schools to the early years block. So those 2 consultations will be very shortly with the schools. Okay. A discussion and vote in December. So, I mean, as a whistle-stop tour of SEND, I think that's it. So if anyone's got any questions, obviously I'm more than happy to answer now, but you'll have my longer presentation on the state of the nation in December.
Thank you, Brennan.
Thank you, Greg. Can I just come in with a little administrational bit on the end? We've got an appendix to this item, which are the places that we're hoping to agree with the SFA through the high needs place change return. And we've got, if I could put that on screen, in previous years we've taken this in December, but we have to return the places in November. So I just felt it, although it's perhaps a bit early in the process, because there can still be local places agreed if that's needed, but we lock in places with academies in November for the next year. So if I just put up on screen, it's at item 11. And I've split it north and west. Just trying to find it. So I've got 1 tab for north and 1 tab for west. And this is listing all of the places by the type of provision, whether it's in a special school, a unit, or we've got the alternative providers in the west, and the suggested place numbers that we will be putting through to the ESFA in the November high needs places return in column K. So if there's any questions from or discussion to be had with those schools, if they could come back to us, please, before November 13th, I think is the deadline. Great. We have to take this to schools forum, the places that we're setting for information each year. So like I say, we did it in December and in January for 2021. So we're starting that process early this year.
And I think what we are looking for today is there's no vote on this, but this is just a view on place numbers. There's a question from Kevin about funding for learners with an EHCP and FE and where that funding comes from.
That comes from high needs funding as well. The post-16 have their own sort of allocation of high needs funding, so that comes out of that.
Okay. So this is just a view. Any comments, any questions? Anyone has any views? Anyone has? Again, I say no vote on this one. It's just a view on place. Sorry,
Kevin has a good point there, and it is something we could add in. We haven't ever done that traditionally. We haven't ever added in AP previously, but I can bring that to the December meeting.
Just looking at that spreadsheet for myself, it says special. Is there an opportunity for another little column that gives the focus of that special provision? We're always talking about there aren't the right number of places for, you know, so whatever the main focus for that specialist provision is, whether that might be, I don't know, Gwyn, is that a possibility?
It absolutely is, yeah. I mean, a lot of our special schools are across the spectrum. They're not, you know, one needs specific, but yeah, I can certainly list a few, you know, they're primary.
But where there is a speciality, and I know that's not a very good word for it, I don't know what the better word for it is, but where there is a focus for the provision that you know, where the majority of the places would be led by, I think that's useful for us to know in terms of the balance of places, particularly as we look at disaggregation.
Yeah, I mean, I will add that into it. The easiest ones are the 3 SEMH schools because they are a single primary need, but the others are much more varied. But I will put on, there'll probably be 2 at least, or 3 primary needs for each of them, but I have no problem with adding those to the list.
I think it just gives us a more rounded picture of special.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Any other comments, colleagues? Any other views on place numbers, other than that they seem reasonable? And we're just going to have to, at this point, you know, you're doing the review, Gwyn, of what's needed and where we see places. We know there's a pressure on places, so we're looking at those as reflecting the pressures that are felt across the county in terms of where provision needs to be and the work that you're doing to extend that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I say again, this is still a national problem. You know, we're just reflecting what's going on everywhere in the pressures on SEND, and that actually, you know, part of our issue is that we do not have capital funds to actually build new schools. The DfE have not released any additional capital funding as yet. And the capital fund we got wouldn't pay for 1 school if we tried to build 1 special school. So, you know, it's a very limited, and we're trying to do the best we can with the limited resources we have. And I do think everyone is working together, and we are working hard to get as far as we can. And Kath, absolutely understand your thing about hope. It's going to be like cross-border. I mean, you are a very specialist, as it were, provision, alternative provision, as indeed sort of CE and Spires are, and so you will still be taking young people from across the county. And then, I mean, in the fullness of time, if opening another provision, 1 north and 1 west, is where it needs to go, but I think that's for another time as we move forward.
Could I chip in a little bit, because I've been looking at how this might play through with the places that we're setting here for the hospital outreach education, also for the other AP providers, where we've set places and they're based in the West. The funding that comes to us for HOE separately, so that's a separate piece of funding within the DSG, that will probably split North and West on a roughly 50% basis. But as the places funding is all coming from the West, it's all being paid for to the West, that will then be recouped off of the West grant. So locally, we'll have a much, much smaller piece of funding left to delegate to you as your budget, because part of your budget is place, part of it is currently top up. They'd call it top up. So essentially, all of the funding that comes to you, because the import and export adjustment we talked about earlier doesn't cover AP, it would just have to be a payment for your services from the Northamptonshire.
Yeah, I think that's a
services.
Conversation out of here. So in that sense, I think coming back to what Gwyn was saying, Gwyn, this reflects a national picture. that we are seeing in terms of overspend of high needs. This is not something that just relates to our county or insufficient management or any of those kinds of things. What we're seeing is what reflects a national picture.
Absolutely it does, and in fact we came late to the overspend party, so we've only been overspent for 2 years, where some authorities have been overspent for considerably longer than that. So you know, it just reflects the pressures that the whole system is under, which is very well documented nationally, and we still await the outcome of the SEND review to see if, you know, any changes will be made which will support the whole system.
And there are no updates on that yet, are there?
Absolutely not, no, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues, for that discussion. Thank you, Gwyn. So, and thank you, Beth. So just item 12, the scheme for financing schools. That's a very short one.
The local authorities are required by law to publish schemes for financing schools, which sets out the financial relationship between them and the schools they maintain. The scheme provides details of the financial roles and responsibilities of the Schools Forum, the local authority, and its chief finance officer, the role of the governing body and the delegation of financial powers to head teachers. It covers topics such as financial controls, instalments of the budget share and banking arrangements, treatment of surplus and deficit balances, income, charging of school budget shares, taxation, provision of services and facilities by the local authority, PFI, PPP, insurance, responsibility for repairs and maintenance and community facilities. NCC's scheme for financing schools is published on the Schools Finance website. And it applies to...
Have there been any changes?
There have, yeah. So the last full review was done in 13-14. The aim of this presentation is to notify Schools Forum of the statutory updates and to start the process of agreeing and publishing the scheme for financing schools to the new authorities, so that there's one in place from the 1st of April for both authorities. So the changes, there are directed revisions which come to us from government, which we have to put in. And there are a few of those, so that's why I'm bringing this to you as well. So local authorities must take the government guidance into account and then revise the schemes, which we have to do through consultation with Schools Forum. This is new to those members who've been in the Schools Forum, possibly because we haven't taken it to you since 2013-14. The government issued a financial transparency consultation last year. Their reason for doing so was because the current financial transparency arrangements for academies are generally stronger than those in place for maintained schools. We think that there is a strong case, where appropriate, for the current academy transparency measures to be adapted and implemented across the maintained school sector in order to strengthen the arrangements for maintained schools. The consultation response was delayed in coming back to us because of COVID and was published in July. All of the changes are to be implemented from 1st of April 2021, except for one which has been implemented from 1st of April 2020. I've put the two proposals here that apply to the scheme for financing schools. In the appendix, I've added all of the proposals so you can see how that has affected maintained schools reporting and transparency across the board from this piece of work. But the two that affect the scheme for financing schools are that it's a requirement for maintained schools to provide LAs with a 3-year budget forecast. They already do that, but we haven't got it written into the scheme, so that's being written in. And the second one is that all schools with a predicted deficit rising above 5% have to submit a recovery plan to the maintaining authority, to North Northamptonshire or West Northamptonshire. Those directed revisions are being incorporated. Apologies. One directed revision was implemented from the beginning of April, which is that local authority maintained schools are now able to join the risk protection arrangement. And instead of taking out insurance, the school may join the Secretary of State's risk protection arrangement for risks covered by the RPA. NCC scheme for financing schools has a few areas that are not within the government guidance framework as additional information, and a few that are out of date. So we propose to consult with maintained schools ahead of December Schools Forum meeting on adopting the 1st of April 2021 an updated version, and we'll send that out between now and December and then come back to have that voted on and agreed by maintained schools in December.
Okay. Thank you. So that will come back to us in December for a vote from the maintained schools. Hoping you will agree there. And 4 actually, because that would be primary and secondary. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. So Secretary, just the school forum plan for the rest of the year. Oh.
Apologies, I should know better. Very briefly, Chair, the next meeting's on the 1st of December. We've got a number of votes on there. So the outcome of the school budgets consultation, early year central expenditure we heard about earlier, and schools PFI needs to come as well. I will add on the item that Beth just mentioned about the financing schools. And then next 2 meetings.
And then I think there was the vote that we didn't take today.
Yes.
Relating to
Correct.
the growth fund. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. And I don't appear to be able to move my presentation on to January and March. I'm not sure what's happened there. But members of. Sorry?
I'm just saying January and March have been cancelled.
Yeah. Well, perhaps not. But what we are likely to do as well is to see a slightly different format to meetings from December onwards, with the shadow forums taking more of a role in ratifying decisions that have been taken that affect the 2021-22 period as well. So we'll be working through the details of exactly how that will work and try and do that in the most efficient way possible, because obviously there's a significant crossover in terms of membership.
Okay. The plan is in there, so it's in the agenda items for today for people to go in and have a look. But what we do know is that that's quite a chunky meeting in December.
Yes, yeah, potentially.
Probably discussion, and obviously we were talking about the high needs update, so there's quite a bit there to come back to us to think about that, because that's obviously a major thing that we need to be concerned about at the moment, given that overspend that is looming for us and the size of it. So next meeting then, everybody, the 1st of December. Is there any urgent business? We've not been notified of any, but is there anything anybody wants to, that anyone has at this point that's an urgent business point? Then if not, I will just check over the page. That is everything, and I would wish everybody if you are having a half term, please have a relaxing one. If not, there'll be even fewer cars on the road than there are now. So I will see you all in December. Thank you.